Montana Territory, 1878. The wind howled across the vast expanse of the Bitterroot Valley, whipping the tall grasses into frenzied waves as Victoria Gardner reined in his stallion atop a rocky outcrop. At 25, he stood tall in the saddle, his lean frame hardened by years of working cattle and breaking horses. The setting sun painted the mountains in hues of purple and gold, casting long shadows across his handsome face, a face too youthful to carry the weight it did. Victoria Vic to most, though he preferred his full name, surveyed the sprawling ranch below. 10,000 acres of prime Montana grazing land, timber, and mountain streams, all bearing the Rocking G brand. 5 years ago, it had been nothing but wild country. Now it represented the fastest-growing cattle operation in the territory, a testament to the fortune he'd amassed through equal parts shrewd investment, back-breaking work, and the silver mine he'd stumbled upon in his 20th year. His success was the talk of Helena to Missoula. The millionaire cowboy, they called him in hushed, admiring tones. The name always made him grimace. Money meant nothing without someone to share it with, and the vast ranch house he'd built 2 years prior stood mostly empty, its rooms echoing with silence. "Home," he muttered to Thunderbolt, his black stallion, "whatever that means." The horse snorted as if in agreement, pawing at the rocky ground. Victoria leaned forward, patting the animal's muscular neck. "I know, boy. Just a little longer, then we will head back." His ranch foreman, Caleb Jenkins, had everything under control, as always. The last cattle drive had brought a handsome profit, and the breeding stock was thriving. By any measure, Victoria Gardner was the most successful rancher under 30 in 3 territories. Yet each night he returned to emptiness, to the grand house with its unused rooms and untouched furniture. The truth that haunted him was simple: the frontier gave and the frontier took. It had given him wealth beyond imagination, but it had taken his family, mother to fever, father to Apache raiders during their journey west when Victoria was 16. His younger brother Thomas had died from a rattlesnake bite 3 years back. The frontier had taught Victoria one immutable lesson: love was a liability, attachment brought only pain. In this wild country, a man survived by keeping his heart locked away, focusing only on building something that would last. Victoria turned Thunderbolt toward home as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Tomorrow he would ride to Missoula for supplies and to check on his investments in the bank. Perhaps he would take dinner at the hotel, pretend for an evening that the echoing loneliness wasn't slowly hollowing him out from within. "Just you and me, Thunderbolt," he said, his words carried away by the Montana wind. "That is how it should be, that is how it must be." But deep within, a voice whispered that there must be more to life than empire building in solitude. The next afternoon found Victoria striding down the boardwalk of Missoula's Main Street, freshly shaven and dressed in a tailored suit that set him apart from the dusty cowboys and rough-hewn miners who populated the growing town. His business at the bank had concluded satisfactorily, another investment paying handsome returns, but the banker's invitation to dinner with his unmarried daughter had been politely declined. Victoria was turning toward the general store when shouting erupted from the direction of the stagecoach office. A coach had just arrived, dust still settling around the team of 6 horses. The driver was gesturing wildly at a slight figure in a dark dress who stood amid a small collection of trunks and valises. "I said there ain't no such place, ma'am. Ain't no Whispering Pines anywhere near here. Your ticket says Missoula, and Missoula is where I brought you." Victoria paused, watching the unfolding scene with mild interest. The woman, for it was clearly a woman, though her face was obscured by a black veil, stood straight-backed, her gloved hands clasped before her. "Sir, I assure you the letter was quite specific. My late husband's cousin operates a ranch called Whispering Pines. I was to be met here and taken there." Her voice was soft but carried a genteel quality that immediately marked her as Eastern, perhaps even European in her education. "Well, ain't nobody waitin' for you, and ain't no ranch by that name for 50 miles in any direction." The driver spat tobacco juice into the street. "You paid to Missoula, and this here's Missoula." The woman's shoulders slumped slightly. Perhaps there has been some misunderstanding. Is there a hotel where I might stay while I sort this matter out?" Victoria found himself moving forward before he had consciously decided to intervene. Something in the woman's dignified bearing despite her obvious distress pulled at him. "The Montana house is just down the street, ma'am," he said, tipping his hat. "Finest accommodations in town." The woman turned, and though her face remained hidden behind the black veil, Victoria could feel her assessing him. "Thank you, sir, I appreciate your kindness." She turned back to the driver. "My luggage, please." "I ain't a porter, lady. You want your things, you move 'em yourself." Victoria stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet that those who knew him recognized as trouble. "I believe the lady asked for assistance with her luggage." The driver opened his mouth to argue, took one look at Victoria's cold gaze and thought better of it. "Fine. I'll help the lady with her trunks." He began hauling them down from the coach roof. Victoria turned his attention back to the woman. She was small, the top of her head barely reaching his shoulder, but she carried herself with unmistakable dignity. "Victoria Gardner, ma'am, may I escort you to the hotel?" Missoula can be disorienting for newcomers. A small, gloved hand emerged from the folds of her black dress. "Amelia Grayson, Mrs. Amelia Grayson, your assistance would be most welcome, Mr. Gardner." As Victoria directed the reluctant driver to transport Mrs. Grayson's luggage to the hotel, he found himself deeply curious about this veiled widow who had arrived searching for a non-existent ranch. At the Montana house, Victoria secured her a room and saw her luggage delivered safely. In the lobby, she finally lifted her veil, revealing a face that caused Victoria's carefully measured words to falter mid-sentence. Amelia Grayson was young, far younger than he had expected, perhaps 22 at most, with delicate features that seemed carved from fine porcelain. Her eyes were a clear, deep blue that reminded him of mountain lakes, and her hair, peeking out from beneath her widow's bonnet, was a rich chestnut brown, glossy even in the dim light of the hotel. Her lips, untouched by rouge, were naturally pink against skin that had clearly been sheltered from harsh western sun. "Mr. Gardner, you were saying—" Her voice brought him back to the present moment. Victoria cleared his throat. "Yes. I was suggesting that perhaps Sheriff Anderson might know of this ranch you seek. The territorial mail can be unreliable. Letters go missing, names get confused." "That is very kind of you." She glanced around the hotel lobby, looking suddenly lost despite her composure. "I confess I am quite adrift. My husband passed 6 months ago, and this cousin of his, a Mr. James Whittaker, wrote offering me a place to stay and perhaps work as a teacher for the children in the area. He described a prosperous ranch called Whispering Pines." Victoria frowned. "I know every rancher within 100 miles, Mrs. Grayson. There is no James Whittaker that I am aware of, nor any place called Whispering Pines." Amelia's composure faltered for the first time, a small crack in her dignified bearing. "I see. Then I fear I have been misled. Or perhaps there has been some terrible confusion." She took a deep breath, straightening her shoulders. "No matter, I shall simply need to make other arrangements." "Do you have family elsewhere who might assist you?" Victoria asked, already suspecting the answer. "No, my parents are gone. I have no siblings. Edmund, my husband, was all I had." She spoke matter-of-factly, but Victoria recognized the desolation behind her words. It mirrored his own. "I see." Victoria hesitated, then made a decision that would alter the course of both their lives. "Mrs. Grayson, I would be pleased if you would join me for dinner this evening. Perhaps together we might determine your best course of action." Amelia studied him for a long moment, those blue eyes seeming to see past his expensive suit to the lonely rancher beneath. "That would be most appreciated, Mr. Gardner. I find myself quite lost in truth." Something in her words struck Victoria deeply. Lost. Yes, that was the word for it. Lost souls, both of them in this vast, beautiful, merciless frontier. "Then follow me," he said simply, offering his arm. "The dining room here serves an excellent roast beef, and I find conversation flows better over good food." As she placed her hand lightly on his arm, Victoria felt something he had not experienced in years, a faint stirring of protectiveness, of connection. He immediately tried to quash it. The frontier had taught him its harsh lessons well. Attachment was weakness. Love was a liability. Yet as he guided the young widow into the dining room, he could not help but wonder if perhaps, just this once, the frontier might grant an exception. Dinner proved surprisingly comfortable. Victoria had expected stilted conversation punctuated by awkward silences. Instead, he found Amelia Grayson to be both well-educated and refreshingly direct, despite her obvious adherence to proper manners. "Boston," she explained when he inquired about her origins. "Though we lived briefly in New York after our marriage, Edmund was in banking. And how did a Boston banker's wife come to be on a stagecoach to Montana territory? Victoria asked, cutting into his roast beef. Amelia's fingers tensed slightly around her water glass. After Edmund died, consumption, a lingering illness, I discovered our financial situation was not as secure as I had believed. The house, the furnishings, even my pianoforte. All had to be sold to satisfy creditors. Victoria nodded, unsurprised. He had seen many men maintain appearances of prosperity while secretly drowning in debt. I took a position as a governess, Amelia continued, but found the situation untenable. Something in her tone suggested there was more to that story, but Victoria did not press. When Mr. Whittaker's letter arrived, offering a position teaching children on his ranch, with room and board provided, it seemed providential. And now you find yourself in Missoula, searching for a ranch that doesn't exist, Victoria concluded. Amelia met his gaze directly. Yes, it appears I have been thoroughly duped, Mr. Gardner. Her frankness surprised a chuckle from him. Please call me Victoria. Her eyebrows rose slightly. Victoria. That is an unusual name for a man. My mother was reading about Queen Victoria when she was carrying me. She admired the Queen's strength and dignity. He shrugged, accustomed to explaining his name. Most people call me Vic, but I prefer my full name. Victoria, she repeated, and something in the way she said it, without mockery or surprise, simply accepting, pleased him. And I am Amelia. What will you do now, Amelia? He asked, signaling the waiter for coffee. She considered the question with admirable composure. I have some funds remaining, enough for perhaps 2 weeks at this hotel. I shall inquire about teaching positions. Surely a frontier town has need of educators. Victoria nodded slowly. The town is growing. There is a small school, but from what I understand, the teacher is a rather elderly gentleman who might welcome assistance. Hope flickered in her eyes. Then I shall call upon him tomorrow. They sipped their coffee in comfortable silence for a few moments before Victoria spoke again. If I may ask, how old are you, Amelia? You seem quite young to be. Widowed, the question was perhaps too direct, but something about her encouraged honesty. 23, she answered without hesitation. Edmund was considerably older, 46 when we married, 50 when he passed. It was a marriage of convenience, arranged by my father before his own death. Again, Victoria sensed there was more to the story, but he merely nodded. I am 25 myself, though sometimes I feel decades older. The frontier ages a person, Amelia agreed, surprising him with her insight. I have been here less than a day, and already I can sense it. This land demands everything from those who choose it. Victoria studied her across the table. In her widow's black, with her perfect posture and gentle voice, Amelia Grayson seemed utterly out of place in rugged Montana. Yet something in her, a core of resilience perhaps, suggested she might belong here after all. As they finished their coffee, Victoria made an impulsive decision. I would like to help you, Amelia. She set down her cup carefully. That is very kind, but I do not require charity, Mr. Gardner, Victoria. Not charity, he corrected quickly. My ranch is large and prosperous. I employ several families, and there are indeed children who would benefit from proper education. The nearest school is too far for daily attendance. Amelia's eyes widened slightly. Are you offering me employment? I am offering you a chance, Victoria said carefully. Come to the Rocking GC if it might suit you to teach there. If not, I will bring you back to Missoula with no obligation. She studied him for a long moment, those blue eyes seeming to search for something in his face. Why would you do this for a stranger? Victoria could have offered many reasons, practical ones about the benefits of education for his workers' children, polite ones about Christian charity. Instead, he found himself speaking a truth he rarely acknowledged even to himself. Because I know what it is to be alone in this territory, to have plans dissolve and find yourself adrift. Because the frontier takes far more often than it gives. Amelia's expression softened. You are very kind, Victoria. I am very practical, he corrected, unwilling to be seen as soft-hearted. An educated workforce is valuable. Will you consider my offer? She didn't answer immediately, instead asking, Tell me about your ranch. How far is it from town? The Rocking G is about 20 miles southeast of here, in the Bitterroot Valley. 10,000 acres, primarily cattle, though we raise some horses as well. The main house is large, too large if I'm honest, with a bunkhouse for the single hands and several smaller cabins for families. We have our own blacksmith, a small store for basic supplies. He paused, realizing he was speaking with unexpected enthusiasm. It's beautiful country, harsh sometimes, but beautiful always. And where would I stay? What would be expected of me? Her questions were practical, showing a commendable caution. There's a small cabin near the main house. It was built for the foreman, but Caleb prefers to stay in the bunkhouse with the men. It's simple but comfortable, 2 rooms, a stone fireplace, solid roof. As for duties, teaching the children would be your primary responsibility. There are 7 of them currently, ranging from 5 to 12 years old. Amelia considered this information, and compensation. Victoria named a sum that made her eyebrows rise. Plus room and board, of course, he added. That is extremely generous. He shrugged. Education matters. I never had much formal schooling myself, but I've learned its value. He didn't add that the amount was negligible compared to his wealth, that seemed unnecessarily boastful. Amelia folded her napkin precisely and placed it beside her plate. May I have until morning to consider your offer? It is most kind, but I should like to sleep on such an important decision. Of course, Victoria signaled for the bill. Shall we say breakfast 8 o'clock? I have business in town that should conclude by noon. If you accept, we could leave for the ranch afterward. That would be satisfactory. She rose gracefully as he pulled out her chair. Thank you for dinner, Victoria, and for your kindness to a stranger. As he escorted her to the staircase leading to the hotel rooms, Victoria found himself hoping she would accept his offer. The thought surprised him. He had built his empire on self-reliance, on the principle that connections were dangerous in this unforgiving land. Yet something about Amelia Grayson, her quiet dignity, her resilience in the face of deception and disappointment, called to him in a way he could not easily dismiss. Until tomorrow, then, he said, bowing slightly. Until tomorrow. She offered a small smile before ascending the stairs, her black dress whispering against the wooden steps. Victoria watched her go, then turned and walked out into the cooling evening air. The stars were emerging overhead, the same stars that would be visible from his ranch 20 miles away. For the first time in years, he found himself eager to return home, not just to his property, but to a house that might perhaps feel less empty in the days to come. Foolishness, he muttered to himself as he strode toward his hotel. Attachment was weakness. The frontier had taught him that lesson repeatedly and brutally. Yet as he prepared for bed that night, Victoria Gardner could not help but wonder if perhaps, just this once, the lesson might prove false. Amelia woke before dawn, the unfamiliar sounds of the frontier town filtering through her window. For a moment, disorientation gripped her. This was not her tiny rented room in Boston, nor the grand bedroom she had once shared with Edmund. Then reality settled around her like a heavy cloak. She was in Missoula, Montana territory, widowed, nearly penniless, and thoroughly deceived by a man who likely never existed. She rose, washed in the basin of cool water, and dressed methodically in one of her 2 remaining black dresses. The widow's weeds felt appropriate not just for Edmund, but for her former life, Boston, security, certainty, all dead and buried now. As she pinned her chestnut hair into a simple but tidy arrangement, Amelia considered Victoria Gardner's unexpected offer. He was a puzzle, a young man with the bearing of someone much older, a frontiersman in a banker's suit, a self-described practical man whose eyes held unmistakable loneliness. 10,000 acres, she murmured to her reflection. The scale of it was almost incomprehensible to her Eastern sensibilities. Edmund's townhouse could have fit into Victoria's ranch hundreds of times over. The prospect of teaching appealed greatly. Before her marriage, Amelia had trained as a teacher, though she had never practiced the profession. Edmund had considered it unsuitable for his wife to work, preferring her to focus on maintaining their home and social connections. Those years of enforced idleness had chafed, though she had never complained. But now the idea of purpose, of using her mind, of shaping young intellects, called to her strongly. Combined with the generous salary Victoria had offered, it seemed almost too fortunate to be true, and therein lay her hesitation. In her 23 years, Amelia had learned that when something seemed too good to be true, it generally was. First with her father's gambling debts forcing her marriage to a man nearly twice her age, then with Edmund's hidden financial difficulties, and now with the non-existent cousin and his phantom ranch. Life had taught her caution. Yet something about Victoria Gardner inspired trust. Perhaps it was the direct way he spoke, or the fact that he was clearly established in the community. The banker had greeted him by name, as had the hotel proprietor and several townspeople they had passed. His offer seemed genuine, practical, as he had insisted, rather than charitable. By the time 8 o'clock approached, Amelia had made her decision. She would accept his offer, but conditionally. 1 month's trial, after which either party could end the arrangement without obligation. It seemed a reasonable compromise between opportunity and caution. Victoria was already seated in the hotel dining room when she descended. He rose immediately upon seeing her, and Amelia noted again how his formal manners contrasted with his obvious frontier strength. He was undeniably handsome, with dark blonde hair that curled slightly where it met his collar, a clean-shaven jaw that suggested regular attention to grooming, and eyes the color of weathered sage. His physique spoke of hard work rather than leisure, broad shoulders tapering to a narrow waist, hands that showed calluses despite their careful grooming. "Good morning, Amelia," he greeted her, pulling out her chair. "I trust you slept well." "As well as one can in unfamiliar surroundings," she replied honestly, taking her seat. "And you?" "The same," he resumed his chair as the waiter approached with coffee. "Have you given thought to my proposal?" Direct as always, Amelia appreciated that quality. "I have. I would like to accept with one condition." Victoria's eyebrows rose slightly, and what might that be? "A trial period of 1 month. At the end of that time, if either of us finds the arrangement unsuitable, we may end it with no ill feelings. You would return me to Missoula, and I would seek employment elsewhere." He considered this for a moment, then nodded. "That seems entirely reasonable. I would suggest adding that should you choose to stay beyond the month, we agree to a minimum term of 1 year. The children would benefit from consistency in their education." It was Amelia's turn to consider. A year was a significant commitment, but if the situation proved suitable during the trial month, it would be logical to continue. "Agreed," she said finally. Victoria smiled, transforming his serious face into something remarkably appealing. "Excellent. Then let us have breakfast, after which I have 2 matters to attend to before we depart. I've arranged for your luggage to be loaded into my wagon at 11:30. They ate companionably, discussing practical matters about the ranch and what Amelia might require for teaching. Victoria mentioned a storage room attached to the main house that could serve as a classroom, and promised to have bookshelves and desks constructed. "The children are eager learners for the most part," he told her. "Their parents value education, though most have had little themselves. You'll find them respectful, if occasionally rough around the edges." "Children are children everywhere," Amelia replied. "I look forward to meeting them." After breakfast, they parted ways, Victoria to his business appointments, Amelia to purchase a few necessities for the journey and her new accommodations. They agreed to meet at the wagon behind the hotel at noon. As Amelia selected sturdy candles, a warm shawl, and writing materials at the general store, she found herself experiencing an unfamiliar emotion: hope. For the first time since Edmund's death, perhaps even before, she felt a sense of possibility rather than constraint. Whatever awaited her at the Rocking G, it represented a new chapter, one she would write herself rather than having it prescribed for her. By noon, she had changed into her traveling outfit, her second-best black dress, slightly less formal than the one she'd worn to breakfast, with a practical bonnet to shield her from the sun. Victoria was waiting beside a well-maintained wagon hitched to 2 strong bay horses, her luggage already loaded and secured. "Ready for your Montana adventure, Mrs. Grayson?" he asked, helping her up to the high seat. Amelia settled her skirts around her. "As ready as one can be for the unknown, Mr. Gardner." He chuckled, climbing up beside her and taking the reins. A philosophical answer. "The children will benefit from such wisdom." As the wagon pulled away from Missoula, Amelia found herself staring ahead rather than behind. The majestic mountains rising before them, the vast sky arching overhead, the sensation of unlimited space, all seemed to whisper of possibility. Beside her, Victoria Gardner guided the team with confident hands, his profile strong against the backdrop of his frontier domain. Amelia could not know what awaited her at the Rocking G, but as the town receded behind them, she felt the first stirrings of something she had not experienced in years. Freedom. The journey to the rocking G took most of the afternoon. Victoria kept a steady pace, mindful of his passenger and the rough roads. They spoke intermittently, comfortable silences stretching between conversations about the territory, the ranch, and the people Amelia would meet there. Caleb Jenkins has been with me since the beginning, Victoria explained. He's older, mid-40s, and knows more about cattle than any man I've met. Mrs. Jenkins runs the household staff and will likely take you under her wing whether you wish it or not. Amelia smiled. She sounds formidable. Terrifying, Victoria agreed with a grin, but loyal to her core. Their eldest son, David, works as one of our cowboys. Their daughter, Martha, helps her mother with the house, and young Peter is one of your future pupils. As he continued describing the various families and hands who worked the ranch, Amelia found herself developing a mental map of this new community. By the time Victoria pointed ahead and said, "There it is, the rocking G," she felt she knew the place already. The reality, however, exceeded her expectations. The ranch spread before them like a small village. The main house was indeed grand, a two-story structure of squared logs and stone, with a wide porch wrapping around three sides. Behind it stood a long, low bunkhouse, several smaller cabins dotting the landscape nearby. A large barn, corrals, and various outbuildings completed the central compound. Beyond, pastures stretched toward distant mountains, cattle visible as dark specks against the green-gold grass. "It's magnificent," Amelia murmured, genuinely impressed. Victoria's expression softened with evident pride. "5 years ago, this was all wilderness. Every building you see I designed and helped construct. Every fence post, every corral, all built by the hands of men who believed in what we were creating here." "You've accomplished something remarkable," Amelia said, understanding now why he was called the Millionaire Cowboy. The operation before her represented extraordinary wealth for a man so young. Victoria guided the wagon toward the main house, where a woman in a practical calico dress was already stepping onto the porch, alerted by the sound of their approach. "That's Mrs. Jenkins," Victoria said, "ready to meet your new home." Home, the word caught Amelia by surprise. She had not thought of any place as home since leaving her father's house for Edmonds. Yet something about this valley, nestled between protective mountains, felt welcoming in a way she had not anticipated. "Yes," she said simply, "I believe I am." Mrs. Jenkins, a stout, capable-looking woman with graying hair pulled into a severe bun, hurried down the steps as Victoria brought the wagon to a halt. "Mr. Gardner, we weren't expecting you back until tomorrow at the earliest." Her gaze fell on Amelia, curiosity evident in her expression. Victoria jumped down, then turned to help Amelia descend. "Change of plans, Mrs. Jenkins. I'd like you to meet Mrs. Amelia Grayson. She's come to teach the children." Mrs. Jenkins's face lit with undisguised pleasure. "A teacher. Oh, that's wonderful news. The young ones have been running wild as colts without proper schooling." She stepped forward, extending work-roughened hands. "Welcome to the rocking G, Mrs. Grayson. We're mighty pleased to have you." Amelia took the offered hands, feeling the strength in them. "Thank you, Mrs. Jenkins. I look forward to meeting the children." "Caleb," Mrs. Jenkins called over her shoulder, "come help with Mrs. Grayson's luggage." A tall, weathered man emerged from a nearby building, wiping his hands on a rag. He approached at a deliberate pace, nodding respectfully to Victoria before turning curious eyes to Amelia. "Mrs. Grayson is our new teacher," Victoria explained. "She'll be taking the foreman's cabin. Could you see to her luggage while Mrs. Jenkins shows her around?" "Course, boss," Caleb Jenkins nodded to Amelia. "Ma'am." "Welcome to the ranch." As he began unloading her trunks, Mrs. Jenkins took Amelia's arm. "Come along, dear. Let me show you the house first, then we'll get you settled in your cabin. You must be exhausted after that long ride. The roads are terrible this time of year." Amelia allowed herself to be guided toward the main house, glancing back once to see Victoria in conversation with his foreman, their heads bent together as they discussed some ranch matter. In his element, with the vast operation spread around him, Victoria Gardner cut an impressive figure, confident, capable, clearly respected by his people. For a moment, Amelia felt a flicker of doubt. What place could someone like her, Eastern city-bred, accustomed to drawing rooms rather than corrals, possibly find in this frontier world? Then Mrs. Jenkins squeezed her arm gently, and the doubt receded. She had survived Edmund's death, the loss of her home, the humiliation of failed finances. She would survive this new challenge as well. The main house was as impressive inside as out, spacious rooms with high ceilings, furnished with a surprising blend of frontier practicality and Eastern refinement. A massive stone fireplace dominated the central living area, comfortable leather chairs and a long sofa arranged before it. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with volumes that made Amelia's heart lift. Mr. Gardner's quite the reader, Mrs. Jenkins commented, following her gaze. Orders books all the way from Chicago and even New York sometimes. Says a man's mind needs feeding same as his body. They continued through the house. A formal dining room that could seat 20, a study filled with maps and ledgers, a kitchen that would have satisfied the most demanding chef. Upstairs were bedrooms, many bedrooms, most appearing unused, their furnishings draped with cloths to protect them from dust. "Does Victoria, Mr. Gardner, live here alone?" Amelia asked, surprised by the scale of the house for a single occupant. Mrs. Jenkins's expression turned briefly sad. "Yes, ma'am. Built it thinking his brother would share it, but Thomas passed 3 years back. Rattlesnake got him while they were mending fences in the north pasture. Mr. Gardner hasn't been the same since. Throws himself into work, keeps building and expanding, but hardly seems to enjoy any of it." The information filled in pieces of the puzzle that was Victoria Gardner, the loneliness she had sensed in him, the determination to create something lasting in this harsh land. Loss had shaped him just as it had shaped her. After the tour of the main house, Mrs. Jenkins led Amelia to the cabin that would be her new home. It stood perhaps 100 yards from the main house, close enough for convenience but far enough for privacy. Though small compared to the ranch house, it was larger than Amelia had expected, with a covered porch across the front and windows on all sides. Inside, a main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a substantial stone fireplace, a sturdy table with 4 chairs, a comfortable-looking armchair, and basic cooking equipment. A door led to a bedroom containing a brass bedstead with a fresh mattress, a dresser, washstand, and small writing desk positioned by the window. "It's lovely," Amelia said sincerely, turning to Mrs. Jenkins. "Far more comfortable than I anticipated. Mr. Gardner had us air it out and freshen everything this morning, sent a rider ahead with instructions while you were still in town." Mrs. Jenkins bustled around, checking that everything was in order. "He's thoughtful that way, for all his stern manner. There's linens in the dresser, towels too. Bathrooms out back. It's a proper outhouse, mind, not just a hole in the ground. There's a pump for water right outside your door, and we've started a fire in the stove so you can have tea when you're ready." Caleb Jenkins arrived with her trunks, setting them carefully in the bedroom before departing with a respectful nod. Mrs. Jenkins followed shortly after, promising to send someone to escort Amelia to dinner in the main house at 6 o'clock. Left alone, Amelia stood in the center of her new home, absorbing the reality of her situation. 24 hours ago, she had arrived in Missoula searching for a non-existent ranch owned by a fictional relative. Now she stood in a comfortable cabin on one of the territory's most prosperous ranches, employed as a teacher, with a month to decide if this new life suited her. The frontier might be harsh, but it offered possibilities she had never imagined in Boston. Here she was not defined by Edmund's status or her father's failures. Here she could be simply Amelia Grayson, teacher, a woman of independent means and purpose. She began unpacking, arranging her modest possessions in the dresser and on the shelves. When a knock came at her door shortly before 6, Amelia was ready, her black dress exchanged for her one non-morning gown. A simple blue dress that matched her eyes, kept packed away during the required year of deep mourning. Opening the door, she was surprised to find Victoria himself rather than a servant. He had changed as well, his travel clothes replaced by clean dark trousers and a white shirt, his hair still damp from washing. "I thought I'd escort you to dinner myself," he said. "Give you a chance to ask any questions that might have occurred to you since your arrival." "That's very thoughtful." Amelia stepped out, closing the door behind her. "I find I'm quite comfortable already, thanks to Mrs. Jenkins's thoroughness. The cabin is perfect." Victoria offered his arm, which she took as they began walking toward the main house. "I'm glad you find it suitable. Tomorrow, if you're not too tired from traveling, I thought you might like to meet the children and see the room we've designated for the school." I'd like that very much, Amelia replied. When do you envision classes beginning? That's entirely up to you. You'll need time to assess the children's current knowledge, prepare lessons, organize the schoolroom. A week, perhaps, 2. A week should be sufficient for initial preparations. I can continue organizing as we begin basic lessons. Victoria nodded approval. Practical, I like that. They had reached the main house, where delicious smells wafted from the kitchen. The dining room table had been set for 2, Amelia noted with surprise as Victoria led her in. I thought perhaps a quiet dinner would allow us to discuss business without interruption, he explained, seeing her expression. The ranch hands eat in the bunkhouse, and Mrs. Jenkins has her own quarters where she dines with her family. Of course, Amelia took the seat he held for her, wondering briefly what the housekeeper might think of this arrangement. Then she dismissed the concern. Frontier customs were different, and clearly Mrs. Jenkins had no objections. Dinner was simple but excellent: roast beef, potatoes, fresh bread, and vegetables that Amelia learned came from the ranch's own garden. Victoria proved an attentive host, ensuring her glass remained filled and inquiring about her preferences. Their conversation flowed easily, covering practical matters regarding her teaching duties and compensation, then drifting to more personal topics. Tell me about Boston, Victoria prompted as they enjoyed apple pie for dessert. I've never been east of the Mississippi. Amelia described the city of her birth, its cobblestone streets and grand buildings, the common where she had walked as a girl, the bookshops and theaters she had frequented. It sounds like another world, Victoria commented. Do you miss it terribly? Amelia considered the question honestly. I miss certain aspects, the cultural opportunities, perhaps, the familiarity. But Boston held many constraints as well, especially for a woman in my position. Here there seems to be more room to breathe. Victoria's expression showed understanding. The frontier strips away many social pretenses. Here you're judged by what you can do, what you can contribute, not by your family connections or the neighborhood where you live. Exactly, Amelia smiled, pleased that he grasped her meaning so readily. Though I imagine there are different constraints here, practical ones imposed by the environment rather than society. Indeed, winter will trap us here for weeks at a time. Summer brings drought, spring brings floods. The land demands respect and preparation. He refilled her coffee cup, but there's a freedom in it too, room to build something of your own. As you have, Amelia observed, a shadow crossed his face. Yes. Though sometimes I wonder what it's all for, building an empire with no one to share it or inherit it. The admission seemed to surprise him as much as it did her. Victoria quickly changed the subject, asking about her teaching experience and plans for the children. But Amelia had glimpsed, once again, the loneliness that seemed to haunt this successful young rancher. Despite his wealth and accomplishments, Victoria Gardner was, in his own way, as lost as she had been arriving in Missoula. Later, as he walked her back to her cabin in the gathering dusk, Amelia found herself unexpectedly comfortable in his company. The stars overhead were impossibly bright, the air fragrant with pine and sage. "Thank you for dinner," she said as they reached her door. "And for everything, Victoria, your kindness to a stranger has been extraordinary." He stood in the shadows of her porch, his expression difficult to read in the fading light. "Not entirely selfless, I assure you. The children need education, and I've been meaning to hire a teacher for some time. Nevertheless, I'm grateful." She paused, then added impulsively, "And I don't believe you're as purely practical as you claim to be." That earned her a rare smile, transforming his serious face. "Perhaps not. Good night, Amelia. Sleep well." "Good night, Victoria." As she closed the door behind him, Amelia felt a curious sensation, as though she had found something she hadn't realized she was seeking. Not simply employment or shelter, but purpose, connection. Outside her window, the vast Montana night spread like a velvet canopy, stars scattered like diamonds across its expanse. For the first time since Edmund's death, perhaps even before, Amelia Grayson felt a sense of rightness, of belonging. The rocking G might not be the whispering pines she had journeyed to find, but somehow it felt like exactly where she was meant to be. The following week passed in a whirlwind of activity as Amelia established herself at the ranch. The room designated for schooling, a former storage space attached to the main house, was transformed under her direction. Victoria provided lumber and men to build bookshelves, desks, and a proper blackboard. Mrs. Jenkins contributed curtains for the windows and a braided rug for the floor. By the end of the week, the space felt like a proper classroom. Meeting her pupils proved both challenging and delightful. As promised, there were 7 children ranging from 5 to 12 years old, 3 from the Jenkins family, and 4 others whose parents worked various roles on the ranch. Their educational backgrounds varied widely. 12-year-old Peter Jenkins could read competently but struggled with figures. 10-year-old twins Sarah and Samuel Wright knew their letters but little else. 8-year-old Mary Ellis had never held a book but could calculate sums in her head from helping her father in the ranch store. The youngest 3, 7-year-old Michael Wright, 6-year-old Elizabeth Ellis, and 5-year-old Benjamin Walsh, were essentially blank slates, eager but untutored. Amelia found herself energized by the challenge. She spent long evenings preparing lessons appropriate for each child's level, developing a schedule that would allow her to work with different groups throughout the day. Victoria provided books from his own library and ordered additional materials from Helena, including primers, slates, and a globe. Classes formally began on Monday morning, with the children arriving bright-eyed and nervously excited, their parents watching proudly as Amelia welcomed each pupil with a smile and a personal word. Even Victoria attended this first session, standing at the back of the room as Amelia explained her expectations and outlined the wonderful journey of learning they would embark upon together. Mr. Gardner has provided everything you need to become educated young men and women, she told her class. All I ask is that you try your best, respect one another, and remember that questions are always welcome. Education is the greatest gift you can receive. It opens doors that might otherwise remain closed to you. From the back of the room, Victoria watched with an expression that Amelia found difficult to interpret. Respect, certainly, but also something wistful, almost sad. When their eyes met briefly, he nodded in approval before quietly departing, leaving her to begin the day's lessons. As the week progressed, Amelia fell into a comfortable routine. Mornings were devoted to teaching, afternoons to individual tutoring for those who needed extra help and preparing the next day's lessons. Evenings she often spent in conversation with Victoria on the porch of the main house, discussing the children's progress, ranch matters, or books they had both read. These evening talks became a highlight of Amelia's days. Victoria proved to be both well-read and thoughtful, despite his lack of formal education. He spoke of history and philosophy with the same easy competence he displayed discussing cattle breeding or water rights. More surprising was his dry wit, which emerged gradually as they grew more comfortable with one another. Mrs. Jenkins tells me you've already won over young Benjamin Walsh, Victoria commented one evening as they watched the sunset paint the mountains in shades of purple and gold. Apparently he announced at dinner that he intends to marry you when he grows up. Amelia laughed. He's a charming little gentleman. Yesterday he brought me a frog as a gift. Impressive courtship strategy, Victoria observed, his eyes crinkling with amusement. I'll have to remember that technique. Such moments of lightness seemed to surprise Victoria himself, as though he had forgotten how to engage in simple pleasantry. Amelia found herself increasingly curious about the events that had shaped this complex man, what had created the barrier he maintained between himself and others, despite his evident longing for connection. On the Saturday concluding her second week at the ranch, Amelia was invited to dinner at the Jenkins cabin. Mrs. Jenkins, call me Margaret, dear, we're not so formal here, had taken a motherly interest in the young widow, regularly checking that she was comfortable and had everything she needed. The dinner was a lively affair, with Caleb Jenkins proving far more talkative at his own table than he was around Victoria. Their 3 children, David, Martha, and Peter, clearly adored their parents, the family's affectionate teasing and shared jokes creating an atmosphere Amelia hadn't experienced since before her own parents' deaths. You're doing wonders with the young ones, Margaret told her as they washed dishes together after the meal, the men having retreated to the porch with pipes. Peter's reading to us every night now, proud as can be of his progress. He's very bright, Amelia said sincerely. All the children are eager learners. Margaret nodded, her hands efficient with the drying cloth. It's good to see Mr. Gardner taking an interest too. He stops by the schoolroom most days, doesn't he? He does, Amelia confirmed. He seems genuinely concerned about the children's education. Margaret gave her a sidelong glance. Been stopping by your cabin regular too, I notice. Amelia felt her cheeks warm. We discussed the school and the children's progress. He's been very supportive of my teaching methods. Course he has, Margaret's tone was knowing. Caleb says he hasn't seen the boss this animated in years. Not since before Thomas died. Unsure how to respond, Amelia concentrated on scrubbing a particularly stubborn pot. Victoria's visits to her cabin had indeed become regular. Every second or third evening, he would appear with a book he thought she might enjoy, or to share news from town, or simply to sit on her porch and talk as darkness fell. There was nothing improper in these visits. They remained outside in full view of the ranch, or if the weather was poor, conversed with the door left pointedly ajar. Yet Amelia could not deny that she looked forward to these encounters with increasing anticipation. He's a good man, Margaret continued when Amelia didn't respond. Too solitary for his own good, builds and builds but never seems to enjoy what he's created. She set down her drying cloth and faced Amelia directly. Life's been hard on him. Lost his parents young, then his brother just when things were finally going well. Makes a person cautious about getting attached. I can understand that, Amelia said quietly. Loss changes how you view the world. Margaret studied her for a moment. Yes, I expect you do understand, don't you, dear? Widowed so young yourself. She patted Amelia's hand. Well, just know that we're almighty pleased to have you here. The ranch feels more like a proper community with a schoolteacher in residence. Reminds folks there's more to life than just work and survival. Later, walking back to her cabin under a sky brilliant with stars, Amelia reflected on Margaret's words. There was indeed more to life than work and survival, a truth she herself was only beginning to rediscover after the constraints of her marriage and the struggle following Edmund's death. Here at the Rocking G, surrounded by the majestic landscape and engaged in meaningful work, Amelia felt increasingly alive, increasingly herself. When she spotted Victoria sitting on her porch steps, a lantern at his feet casting a warm glow, her heart quickened in a way that both pleased and alarmed her. Evening, Amelia, he greeted her, standing as she approached. I hope you don't mind the intrusion. I wanted to let you know I'll be riding out to the north pasture tomorrow with some of the men. We'll be gone 3 or 4 days, checking fences and moving cattle to fresh grazing. Of course, she mounted the steps, noting the book in his hands. Were you waiting long? Not at all. I've been keeping company with Mr. Emerson. He held up the volume of essays. I thought you might enjoy this, given your educational philosophy, his thoughts on self-reliance particularly. Amelia accepted the book, their fingers brushing briefly in the exchange. Thank you. I've read some of his work, but not this collection. Victoria seemed reluctant to leave, though he had delivered his message and it was growing late. How was dinner with the Jenkins family? Lovely, they're wonderful people. Margaret has been very kind to me. He nodded. The Jenkins have been with me since I staked my claim here. They're the closest thing to family I have now. The admission seemed to surprise him, as though he hadn't intended to reveal so much. Amelia saw an opportunity to learn more about the reserved rancher who had so unexpectedly changed the course of her life. Victoria, she said gently, would you tell me about your brother? Margaret mentioned him, and I realized I know very little about your family. For a moment she thought he might refuse. His expression closed, a shadow passing over his features. Then he sighed, settling back onto the porch step and gesturing for her to join him. Thomas was 2 years younger than me, he began as Amelia arranged her skirts and sat beside him. Bright, always laughing. Even after our parents died, he managed to find joy in small things. Victoria spoke haltingly at first, then with increasing fluency as memories surfaced. He described traveling west with Thomas after their parents' deaths, working odd jobs along the way, finally arriving in Montana territory where they had labored in the silver mines until Victoria's lucky strike. The silver claim was enough to buy our first 1,000 acres and some breeding stock, he explained. Thomas had a gift with horses, could gentle the wildest Mustang with just patience and a gentle voice. We had plans to develop a breeding program alongside the cattle operation. His voice grew strained as he reached the part of the story Amelia had been anticipating. We were checking fence lines in the north pasture, the same area I'm heading to tomorrow. Thomas was ahead of me when his horse suddenly reared, By the time I reached him, the rattlesnake had struck twice. He didn't suffer long. Amelia reached out impulsively, covering his hand with hers. I'm so sorry, Victoria. He looked down at their joined hands, then back to her face, his expression vulnerable in a way she had never seen before. I built all this, he gestured toward the ranch sprawling around them, for us, for our future. Without him it sometimes seems pointless, empty. Yet you continue building, Amelia observed quietly. Making something lasting and meaningful, providing livelihoods for dozens of families, creating a community. Victoria's gaze held hers in the lantern light. Perhaps, but to what end? Empire building is cold comfort on winter nights. The raw honesty of his statement touched something deep within Amelia. Before she could respond, Victoria shook his head as if clearing away unwelcome thoughts. Forgive me, it's late and you've had a long day. He rose, gently withdrawing his hand from beneath hers. I should let you rest. Amelia stood as well, clutching Emerson's essays to her chest. Thank you for sharing that with me, Victoria, and for the book. He nodded, already retreating into his customary reserve. Enjoy your Sunday. I'll see you when we return from the north pasture. As she watched him walk away, his tall figure soon swallowed by darkness, Amelia recognized the emotion that had been growing within her since their first meeting in Missoula. Attraction, certainly, but something deeper as well, a recognition of kindred spirits, of shared wounds and shared resilience. Inside her cabin, Amelia lit a lamp and opened the volume of Emerson, turning pages until a particular passage caught her eye. The purpose of life is not to be happy. It is to be useful, to be honorable, to be compassionate, to have it make some difference that you have lived and lived well. She traced the words with her finger, thinking of Victoria Gardner, a man who had built an empire yet found it hollow without someone to share it. A man whose kindness to a lost widow had been disguised as practicality. A man who, perhaps, was only beginning to recognize that usefulness and honor were not enough to fill the emptiness left by loss. As she prepared for bed, Amelia wondered what the coming weeks would bring. Her trial month was half complete. Soon she would need to decide whether to remain at the Rocking G for the agreed year, to make this place and these people truly her own. The decision, she realized, was already made in her heart. The question that remained was far more complex. Could two people wounded by life's harsh lessons find the courage to risk attachment once more? Or would the barriers built by grief and loss prove too formidable to overcome? Sleep came slowly that night, her dreams filled with vast Montana skies and a pair of sage-green eyes that seemed to see directly into her soul. Victoria's absence stretched to nearly a week due to unexpected problems with water access in the north pasture. During this time, Amelia threw herself into teaching with renewed dedication, extending class hours and developing more ambitious projects for her students. The children responded enthusiastically, particularly to her introduction of drama as an educational tool. They were currently preparing short scenes from Shakespeare's A Midsummer Night's Dream, simplified for their understanding but maintaining the beauty of the language. In the evenings, Amelia found herself restless, missing the conversations that had become an important part of her routine. She took to walking the ranch grounds after dinner, admiring the changing light on the distant mountains and nodding greetings to the hands returning from their daily tasks. On one such walk, she encountered David Jenkins leading a limping horse toward the stable. "Evening, Mrs. Grayson," he called, touching his hat respectfully. At 20, David was a serious young man who had inherited his father's quiet competence and his mother's warm eyes. "Out for your constitutional?" "Yes," Amelia replied, approaching to examine the horse. "What happened to this poor creature?" "Stepped in a gopher hole this afternoon. Nothing broken, thankfully, but he'll need a few days' rest." David patted the animal's neck. "I was just getting him settled for the night." "May I join you? I've always loved horses, though I've had little opportunity to be around them." David seemed surprised but pleased. "Of course, ma'am. You can help me mix his liniment if you've a mind to." Amelia followed him into the stable, welcoming the warm, hay-scented air after the cooling evening. She watched attentively as David demonstrated how to check the horse's injured leg, mix a soothing poultice, and apply it properly. "You've got a gentle touch," he observed as she stroked the horse's nose while David worked. "Most city folks are nervous around the big ones." My grandfather had a carriage horse I adored as a child, Amelia explained. He let me feed her apples and brush her coat. I've missed that connection with animals. David nodded understanding. Nothing like the bond between a person and a good horse. Mr. Gardner's the same way with Thunderbolt, that big black stallion of his. Talks to that horse like it's his brother. Victoria strikes me as someone who relates more easily to animals than people sometimes, Amelia observed, then wondered if she had overstepped. But David just chuckled. You've got his measure, ma'am, though he's been different since you came, more like the man he was before Thomas died. Ma says so too. Before Amelia could respond to this remarkable statement, the stable door opened, and Caleb Jenkins entered, surprise registering on his weathered face at the sight of the schoolteacher in his domain. Mrs. Grayson, didn't expect to find you here. I was walking and came across David bringing in this injured horse. He's been kind enough to teach me about treating a sprain. Caleb nodded, his expression warming slightly. David's got a way with horses, gets it from his mother's side. From you, Pa, David corrected with easy affection. Ma can't tell one end of a horse from the other, and you know it. This gentle teasing between father and son touched Amelia deeply. Her own father had been distant, preoccupied with gambling debts and failed investments. Edmund, significantly older and set in his ways, had treated her with polite detachment rather than warmth. The easy affection of the Jenkins family represented something she had never experienced but instinctively recognized as precious. Mr. Gardner send word about when they're heading back, David asked his father. Tomorrow or next day, weather permitting. They've got the water situation sorted, just finishing up the last stretch of fence repair. Caleb turned to Amelia. Boss asked after you in his message, ma'am. Wanted to know how the school was progressing. Amelia felt a flush of pleasure at this information. That's kind of him. Please tell him in your reply that the children are doing wonderfully. We've started a Shakespeare production. Caleb's eyebrows rose. Shakespeare out here. A simplified version, Amelia assured him. The children are learning about language, memory, and public speaking, all valuable skills regardless of where they live. If you say so, ma'am. Caleb didn't sound entirely convinced. I'll pass along your message. After helping David finish tending to the horse, Amelia bid the Jenkins men good night and continued her walk, her thoughts turning to Victoria. The knowledge that he had inquired about her in his message home warmed her in a way that both pleased and concerned her. Her feelings for the young rancher had grown steadily over the past weeks, developing from admiration and gratitude into something deeper and more complex. She found herself watching for him, anticipating their conversations, noticing small details about him. The way his eyes crinkled when he was truly amused, how he always removed his hat when entering a room where she was present, the gentleness of his hands when handling books or small objects. Yet Amelia remained cautious. Her marriage to Edmund had been arranged for financial convenience, devoid of passion or deep connection. While Edmund had treated her with basic kindness, he had never sought her opinions or seemed particularly interested in her as a person. After his death, she had assumed her future would be defined by independence rather than attachment. The possibility of genuine connection, of sharing not just proximity but heart and mind, was both exhilarating and terrifying, and Victoria himself remained something of an enigma. For every glimpse of vulnerability he allowed her, there were moments when he retreated behind walls of reserve. His kindness was consistent, his respect evident, but his deeper feelings remained carefully guarded. Whether this guardedness stemmed from the losses he had suffered or from uncertainty about her own feelings, Amelia could not determine. The trial month she had requested was nearing its end. Soon she would need to formally commit to staying at the Rocking G for a year, a decision that seemed increasingly tied to her evolving relationship with Victoria himself. The teaching position was fulfilling, the community welcoming, but it was the ranch's owner who had become the center of her thoughts in a way she had never anticipated. As she reached her cabin, the rising moon casting silver light across the valley, Amelia made a decision. When Victoria returned, she would speak openly about her intention to stay. And perhaps, if courage did not desert her, she would find a way to express the deeper feelings that had taken root in her heart. Victoria and his men returned at dusk 2 days later, their horses weary and dust-coated after the long ride. Amelia, who had been helping Martha Jenkins prepare dinner in the main house, heard the commotion of their arrival and stepped onto the porch. Her heart quickened at the sight of Victoria dismounting from Thunderbolt, his tall figure immediately recognizable even at a distance. He spoke briefly with Caleb, then handed his reins to one of the hands and began walking toward the house. When he spotted Amelia on the porch, his stride faltered momentarily before resuming with greater purpose. Even from a distance, she could see that he was trail-worn and weary, his face stubbled with several days' growth of beard, his clothes dusty from the ride. "Amelia," he greeted her, removing his hat as he mounted the steps. "How are things at the ranch, the school?" "Everything is well," she assured him. "The children are progressing nicely, and there have been no problems that Mrs. Jenkins and Mr. Jenkins couldn't handle." He nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression despite his obvious fatigue. "Good, that's good." He seemed about to say more, then noticed Martha watching curiously from the doorway. "I should clean up before dinner. We can talk more later." Of course, Amelia smiled, noting the way his eyes lingered on her face before he entered the house. "Welcome home, Victoria." Dinner that evening was a somewhat formal affair, with Caleb and Margaret Jenkins joining Victoria and Amelia at the main table while Martha served. Victoria, freshly bathed and shaved, reported on the work accomplished in the north pasture, fences repaired, water access improved, cattle moved to better grazing. The broken spur hands were helpful, he concluded, referring to the neighboring ranch. James Cooper sent 4 men to assist with the dam repairs. "That was neighborly of him," Margaret commented, "especially after that business last fall with the strays." Victoria nodded, Cooper's fair-minded. "We settled that misunderstanding, and he's been a good neighbor since." He turned to Amelia. "James Cooper owns the ranch that borders our northern pasture, about half our size but well-run. He's been in the territory longer than most, came out after the war." Amelia appreciated his effort to include her in the conversation. "I'd like to meet more of the neighboring families. Perhaps some of their children might benefit from schooling as well." "That's not a bad idea," Victoria agreed. "Cooper has 2 youngsters himself, though his place might be too far for daily travel. Perhaps a boarding arrangement could be worked out." The conversation continued companionably through dessert, after which Caleb and Margaret excused themselves, leaving Victoria and Amelia alone in the dining room. A slightly awkward silence fell, broken when Victoria rose and gestured toward the door. "Would you care to walk? The evening's pleasant, and I've been in the saddle so long my legs could use the stretch." Outside, the night was indeed beautiful, clear and cool, with a crescent moon providing just enough light to navigate the paths between buildings. They walked in comfortable silence for several minutes, eventually stopping at a small rise overlooking the ranch complex. "I missed our conversations while I was away," Victoria said quietly, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains rather than on her. "Found myself thinking of things I wanted to tell you, questions I wanted to ask." The admission, simple as it was, made Amelia's pulse quicken. "I missed them too. The evenings seemed particularly long." He turned to her then, his expression difficult to read in the dim light. "Your trial month ends in a few days. Have you made a decision about staying?" "Yes," Amelia met his gaze steadily. "I would like to remain if you're satisfied with my teaching." "More than satisfied," Victoria said quickly. "The children are thriving. Their parents speak of nothing else but the progress they're making and their enthusiasm for learning." "I'm glad," Amelia hesitated, then added, "it's not only the teaching that makes me want to stay." Victoria went very still, waiting. When she didn't immediately continue, he prompted gently, "What else, Amelia?" She drew a deep breath, gathering her courage. "I've found something unexpected here, a sense of purpose, yes, but also connection to this place. To the people," she paused, then finished softly, "to you." Victoria turned fully toward her, close enough that she could see the emotion in his eyes despite the darkness. "When I found you in Missoula, lost and searching for something that didn't exist, I thought I was being practical, solving a problem, filling a need at the ranch. I didn't expect," he trailed off, seeming to struggle for words. "What didn't you expect?" Amelia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't expect to find myself looking forward to evenings on your porch more than anything else in my day. I didn't expect to miss you with an actual physical ache when I was away. He shook his head, a rueful smile touching his lips. I've spent years building walls, Amelia. Convincing myself that attachment only leads to pain in this harsh country. Yet in a few short weeks, you've made me question everything I thought I knew. Amelia felt tears prickling behind her eyes at the raw honesty in his voice. I understand, she said softly. After Edmund died, even during our marriage, I convinced myself that independence was safer than connection, that I could find fulfillment in work alone. But being here with you... Victoria reached for her hand, his fingers warm against hers in the cool night air. I don't want you to stay just as our teacher, Amelia. I want, he paused, seemed to reconsider his words, then continued more carefully. I'd like us to explore what's developing between us, slowly, properly, with no pressure or expectations. The tenderness in his voice, the careful way he held her hand as if it were something infinitely precious, filled Amelia with a warmth that had nothing to do with the summer evening. I'd like that very much, Victoria. They stood in silence for a long moment, hands joined, the vastness of the Montana night surrounding them. Then Victoria raised her fingers to his lips in a gesture so gentle it brought fresh tears to her eyes. It's getting late, he said softly. May I walk you back to your cabin? Please. They walked slowly, still hand in hand, neither rushing to end the moment. At her door, Victoria released her fingers reluctantly. Good night, Amelia, sleep well. Good night, Victoria, I'm glad you're home safely. His smile at her words was tender, genuine in a way his usual controlled expressions were not. So am I. As Amelia prepared for bed that night, she found herself humming softly, a sign of happiness she couldn't remember experiencing since childhood. The frontier had taken much from her, as it had from Victoria. But perhaps, she thought as sleep began to claim her, it might give something precious in return. The weeks that followed marked a gentle courtship, conducted with respect for propriety, yet increasingly open in its intentions. Victoria called formally at Amelia's cabin 3 evenings a week, sometimes bringing small gifts, a book of poetry, wildflowers gathered during his rides, fresh honey from the hives recently established behind the orchard. On Sundays, they rode together after church services, Victoria patiently teaching Amelia to handle a gentle mare he had selected especially for her. These Sunday rides quickly became Amelia's favorite activity. Victoria was a different person on horseback, more relaxed, more animated, eager to share his love for the land he had claimed as his own. He showed her hidden meadows carpeted with wildflowers, crystal streams where trout darted in sunlit pools, rocky outcrops that offered breathtaking views of the valley. On one such ride, nearly 2 months after Amelia's arrival at the ranch, they stopped for a picnic lunch in a small clearing beside a burbling creek. September had brought cooler temperatures and hints of gold to the aspens dotting the hillsides. This is one of my favorite places, Victoria told her as he spread a blanket on the grass. Thomas and I found it during our first year here. We used to fish that pool downstream, the trout practically jump into your hands. Amelia noted that he could now speak of his brother without the shadow of pain that had previously accompanied such memories. It's beautiful, she agreed, settling onto the blanket and unpacking the lunch Margaret had prepared. Peaceful. Victoria stretched out beside her, propping himself on one elbow as he accepted a sandwich. I used to come here when decisions weighed heavily. Something about the sound of the water clears the mind. What sort of decisions? Amelia asked, curious about this glimpse into his past. Whether to expand north or east, which breeding bulls to purchase if we could afford a new windmill, he smiled slightly, the usual thrilling dilemmas of ranch management. Amelia laughed, pleased by his rare display of self-deprecation. Important decisions, nonetheless. The livelihood of many families depends on your judgment. True enough, Victoria's expression grew more serious. I've always felt that responsibility keenly, especially after Thomas died and it was mine alone. He picked up a small stone, turning it in his fingers. That's partly why I've been so focused on building, expanding, securing the ranch's future. People depend on the rocking G for their survival. The expansion has been remarkable, Amelia observed. Margaret mentioned you've nearly doubled the acreage since she and Caleb first joined you. Victoria nodded. We're up to 10,000 acres now, with grazing rights on another 5,000 of public land. The cattle operation is thriving, and the horse breeding program is finally showing promise. He glanced at her, his expression softening. But lately I've been thinking about more than just expansion. Oh, Amelia felt her heart quicken at his tone. Yes, about what makes a ranch or any enterprise truly successful. He set down the stone, his gaze direct. It's not just size or profit, it's whether it provides genuine satisfaction, meaning, community. And does the rocking G provide those things for you? Amelia asked softly. Victoria considered the question seriously. It's beginning to, he said finally, more so in recent months than in all the years before. The implication was clear, and Amelia felt warmth spreading through her at his words. Their courtship, while still in its early stages, had progressed with increasing openness. Victoria's initial reserve had gradually given way to more direct expressions of admiration and affection. Yet they had not spoken explicitly of love or future plans, both seemingly content to allow their relationship to develop naturally. "I'm glad," she said simply, reaching to touch his hand briefly. "This place deserves to bring you joy, not just responsibility." They finished their lunch in comfortable conversation, then walked along the creek, Victoria pointing out trout hiding in the deeper pools. When they eventually mounted their horses to return to the ranch, Amelia felt a contentment she had never known in her previous life. A sense of rightness, of belonging, that had nothing to do with social position or expectation, and everything to do with the man riding beside her and the bond developing between them. Back at the ranch, Victoria helped her dismount, his hands lingering at her waist slightly longer than necessary. "Thank you for accompanying me today," he said, his voice pitched low for her ears alone despite the empty stable yard. "Seeing this land through your eyes makes me appreciate it anew." Amelia smiled up at him, momentarily forgetting the presence of the stable hand waiting to take their horses. "Thank you for sharing it with me. Each ride reveals new wonders." Victoria's gaze dropped briefly to her lips, then returned to her eyes, a question evident in his expression. For a breathless moment, Amelia thought he might kiss her, their first if he did. But then the stable hand coughed discreetly and the moment passed. "Until dinner," Victoria said, reluctantly stepping back. "Until dinner," Amelia echoed, equally reluctant to end their time together. As she walked to her cabin to freshen up before the evening meal, Amelia acknowledged to herself what she had known for weeks but had not yet articulated even in her private thoughts. She was falling in love with Victoria Gardner, not with his wealth or his position, not with the security he represented, but with the man himself. His integrity, his sense of responsibility, the vulnerability he allowed her to glimpse beneath his carefully maintained strength. What remained uncertain was whether Victoria himself was ready to acknowledge similar feelings. His actions increasingly suggested deep attachment, yet he had not spoken the words that would transform their courtship from possibility to commitment. Sometimes Amelia caught him watching her with an expression that seemed to contain equal parts longing and hesitation, as though fighting some internal battle. Margaret Jenkins, who had become both friend and surrogate mother to Amelia, had her own theory. "He's afraid," she told Amelia one afternoon as they shelled peas on the kitchen porch. "Lost everyone he loved, that boy has. Makes a person gun-shy about risking their heart again." "I understand that feeling," Amelia had replied softly. "After Edmund died, I convinced myself that independence was safer than attachment, that I could find fulfillment in work alone." Margaret's knowing eyes had assessed her kindly. "And now I'm beginning to believe that the possibility of loss is outweighed by the certainty of loneliness." "Well," Margaret had said with satisfaction, "when you're ready to share that wisdom with Mr. Gardner, I suspect he'll be mighty relieved to hear it." The memory of that conversation accompanied Amelia as she changed for dinner, selecting a dress of deep blue that Victoria had once commented brought out the color of her eyes. Perhaps tonight, if the moment presented itself, she would find the courage to speak more directly of her feelings. The cautious dance they had been performing, while sweet in its way, was beginning to seem unnecessarily prolonged. At dinner that evening, however, Victoria was preoccupied, responding to her conversational overtures with distracted politeness. When she finally asked directly if something was troubling him, he sighed, setting down his fork. "I received a letter from James Cooper today. There's been trouble along our shared boundary, someone cutting fences, driving cattle onto his property, then claiming their strays when his hands catch them." "Someone from the Rocking G," Amelia asked, concerned. Victoria shook his head firmly. Absolutely not. My men know better, and in any case we have no need to rustle cattle. No, this is someone else, probably that new outfit that set up camp in the hills east of Cooper's place. They've been causing problems throughout the area. What will you do? Cooper's invited me to join him and some other local ranchers for a meeting. We need to present a united front against these troublemakers before things escalate. He ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of frustration. I'll ride over to the Broken Spur tomorrow. Might be gone a few days if we need to track these rustlers. I understand. Amelia tried to hide her disappointment at the interruption to their developing routine. Will it be dangerous? Victoria's expression softened at her evident concern. Not likely. These types usually back down when confronted by sufficient numbers. They prey on isolated ranchers, counting on the distances between properties to work in their favor. Despite his reassurances, Amelia remained worried. The frontier was lawless in many ways, with formal justice often days of travel away. Ranchers protected their own, which sometimes led to violence. After dinner, Victoria walked Amelia to her cabin as usual, but his mind was clearly on the coming confrontation. At her door, he apologized for his distraction. Forgive me for being poor company tonight. Ranch matters sometimes demand immediate attention. Of course, Amelia assured him, I understand completely. Victoria studied her face in the lamplight spilling from her window. I'll miss our evening conversations while I'm gone. As will I, Amelia hesitated, then added softly, Please be careful, Victoria. I've grown rather accustomed to having you in my life. The admission, mild as it was, brought a warmth to his eyes that had been absent all evening. Have you now? Indeed, emboldened by his response, Amelia continued. In fact, I find myself increasingly fond of your company, quite remarkably so, considering how brief our acquaintance has been. Victoria moved closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his green eyes. Amelia Grayson, are you flirting with me? Perhaps, she admitted, enjoying the rare opportunity to see him genuinely surprised. Is it working? His laugh was low and warm. More effectively than you might imagine. His expression grew serious again, though the warmth remained. I'll be as careful as circumstances allow, and I'll return as quickly as possible. See that you do, Amelia said, matching his serious tone despite the smile playing at her lips. I'll hold you to that promise. Victoria raised her hand to his lips, a gesture that had become customary in their courtship. But this time, instead of the brief, formal kiss he usually bestowed upon her fingers, he turned her hand and pressed his lips to her palm, an intimate gesture that sent a shiver of awareness through her entire body. Until I return, he murmured against her skin before reluctantly releasing her hand. Until then, Amelia whispered, her palm still tingling from the warmth of his lips. She watched him stride away into the darkness, his tall figure soon lost among the shadows of the ranch buildings. Only when he had completely disappeared did she enter her cabin, closing the door behind her and leaning against it, her heart racing with a combination of concern for his safety and elation at the undeniable progress in their relationship. The rustlers might delay their courtship, but Amelia sensed that a threshold had been crossed. When Victoria returned, she believed they would finally speak openly of feelings too significant to remain unacknowledged. What she could not know was that fate had a very different plan, one that would test not only their growing attachment, but the very foundations of trust between them. Victoria's absence stretched to a week, then nearly 2. Brief messages arrived periodically, carried by ranch hands traveling between properties, keeping Amelia informed of the situation without providing much detail. Rustlers identified. Pursuing legal channels first. Meeting with territorial marshal may be delayed further. All is well, do not worry, will explain upon return. These terse communications did little to ease Amelia's growing concern. The ranch continued to function smoothly under Caleb Jenkins's capable management, and her teaching duties kept her occupied during the day. But the evenings felt increasingly empty without Victoria's visits, their conversations, the subtle dance of courtship that had become so central to her life. Margaret Jenkins provided what information she could, though Caleb himself seemed unusually reticent about the situation. Rustling's serious business out here. Margaret explained one evening as Amelia helped her preserve the last of the summer vegetables. Not just about stolen cattle, but about establishing who controls the territory. If these newcomers aren't stopped now, they'll think the established ranchers are weak. But surely the law, Amelia began. Margaret's laugh interrupted her. Law's mighty thin out here, dear. The marshal has hundreds of miles to cover with just a few deputies. Mostly ranchers handle their own problems. This reality of frontier justice did nothing to alleviate Amelia's worries. She tried to focus on her teaching, introducing new subjects to challenge her increasingly capable students. The Shakespeare production was progressing well, with a performance planned for the coming month. She had also begun teaching basic scientific principles, using the natural environment as her laboratory. On the Sunday marking Victoria's 12th day of absence, Amelia was working in the schoolroom, preparing materials for the coming week, when she heard the commotion of riders entering the ranch yard. Her heart leapt at the thought that Victoria might have returned. Setting aside her work, she hurried to the window. A group of horsemen had indeed arrived, but Victoria was not among them. Instead, Caleb was greeting a distinguished-looking gentleman in his 50s, accompanied by what appeared to be 2 deputies and several ranch hands. The older man dismounted with the ease of someone accustomed to long hours in the saddle, despite his age. Curious, Amelia stepped outside just as Margaret emerged from the main house. "Marshal Thornton," Margaret exclaimed, wiping her hands on her apron. "This is unexpected. What brings you to the rocking G?" The marshal removed his hat respectfully. "Mrs. Jenkins, sorry to intrude on your Sunday. I'm looking for Mr. Gardner. Is he about?" Margaret shook her head. "He's been at the Broken Spur these past 2 weeks. Something about rustlers causing trouble for James Cooper." Marshal Thornton frowned. "That's just it. I've been working with Gardner and Cooper on that situation. Left them 3 days ago to file paperwork in Helena. Gardner was supposed to be heading home after we wrapped things up." Amelia felt a cold knot of fear forming in her stomach. She moved closer, drawing the marshal's attention. "Ma'am," he acknowledged, tipping his hat. "This is Mrs. Grayson, our schoolteacher," Margaret explained. "Mrs. Grayson, Marshal Thornton is the territorial lawman for this region." Amelia nodded a greeting, then asked the question uppermost in her mind. "Are you saying Victoria, Mr. Gardner, is missing?" The marshal's weathered face showed concern. "Not necessarily missing, ma'am. Could be he was delayed, took a different route home. But James Cooper expected him to leave the same day I did, and he hasn't returned to the Broken Spur either." Caleb Jenkins, who had been listening silently, spoke up. 3 days is a long time to be unaccounted for, especially with Gardner's usual habits. He's punctual to a fault. "That's my thinking as well," the marshal agreed, "which is why I'm here. I'm organizing search parties to check the routes between the Broken Spur and both here and Helena. Cooper's already got men looking along the direct trail." The fear in Amelia's stomach tightened into dread. Victoria was missing. The man who had rescued her from uncertainty in Missoula, who had created a place for her at his ranch, who had gradually opened his guarded heart to the possibility of attachment. He had vanished somewhere in the vast Montana wilderness. "I'd like to join the search," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. All eyes turned to her in surprise. Marshal Thornton recovered first, his expression kind but firm. "I appreciate your concern, Mrs. Grayson, but searching rough country is no task for a lady. Best leave it to those accustomed to such work." Before Amelia could protest, Margaret intervened. "Mrs. Grayson has become quite adept on horseback, Marshal. Mr. Gardner himself has been teaching her, and she knows him well. They've been—" She hesitated, glancing at Amelia. "Friends," Amelia supplied, though the word seemed inadequate for what had been developing between them. "Close friends." The marshal still looked skeptical, but Caleb unexpectedly supported Amelia's request. "Mrs. Grayson has good sense and a calm head, Marshal. She wouldn't be in the way. And having someone along who knows the boss well might be helpful." Marshal Thornton considered this, then nodded reluctantly. "Very well, but you'll stay with the main search party, Mrs. Grayson, not venturing off alone under any circumstances. And if the terrain becomes too difficult, you'll return to the ranch immediately. Clear?" "Perfectly clear," Amelia agreed, relieved to be included. The thought of waiting passively at the ranch while others searched for Victoria was unbearable. Plans were quickly formulated. The marshal would lead one search party along the main trail between the Broken Spur and the Rocking G. A second group, led by one of his deputies, would check the alternative route that followed the river. Caleb would organize the Rocking G hands to search the hill country between the properties, where Victoria might have gone if he decided to check on boundary lines. "We leave at first light," the marshal announced. "Everyone bring provisions for 3 days. The country between here and Cooper's Place is rough, lots of places a man could have trouble without being found." As the groups dispersed to prepare, Amelia returned to her cabin, her mind racing with possibilities, none of them pleasant. Victoria was an experienced frontiersman, unlikely to become lost or to make amateur mistakes in wilderness travel. If he was missing, something serious had happened, an accident perhaps, or she refused to complete the thought. Instead, she focused on practical preparations, gathering warm clothing, filling her canteen, packing the basic medical supplies she always kept on hand. If Victoria was injured, she wanted to be prepared to help. A knock at her door interrupted these preparations. Margaret entered, carrying a bundle of additional items: jerky, dried fruit, extra bandages. "Here, dear, you'll need these." She set the bundle on the table, then faced Amelia directly. "Now, I want you to prepare yourself. The marshal is right about the country being rough. If Victoria's been out there injured for days." "I know," Amelia said quietly. "I understand the possibilities." Margaret studied her face, then nodded, apparently satisfied by what she saw. "You're stronger than you look, aren't you? Good. You'll need that strength, whatever we find." "We will find him," Amelia said with more confidence than she felt. "Victoria knows that land better than anyone. If he's injured, he'll have found shelter, water." "From your lips to God's ears," Margaret hugged her briefly. "Get some rest now. Tomorrow will be challenging." Sleep proved elusive, however. Amelia lay awake long into the night, her mind filled with images of Victoria, injured, trapped, calling for help that didn't come. When she finally drifted off near dawn, her dreams were troubled, fragmented scenes of searching endless landscapes without finding what she sought. Morning came too quickly and not soon enough. Dressed in her most practical clothing, a divided riding skirt she had commissioned from Margaret's skilled hands, a sturdy shirtwaist, and a warm jacket, Amelia joined the gathering search parties in the ranch yard. The marshal assigned her to his group, which would follow the main trail. Mounted on the gentle mare Victoria had selected for her, Amelia took her place among the seasoned frontiersmen, grateful for their acceptance despite her gender and relatively recent arrival in the territory. As they rode out just after sunrise, Amelia offered a silent prayer for Victoria's safety. Whatever had happened, whatever they might find, one thing was certain: the cautious dance of their courtship now seemed like wasted time. If when they found him, Amelia resolved to speak plainly of her feelings. Life on the frontier was too uncertain, too precious, for hesitation or half-measures in matters of the heart. The search party rode steadily throughout that first day, checking obvious places where a rider might seek shelter: caves, rock overhangs, stands of trees dense enough to provide protection from the elements. They found nothing, not even tracks that might indicate Victoria had passed this way. By nightfall, Amelia's body ached from hours in the saddle, but her determination remained undiminished. As they made camp beside a small stream, Marshal Thornton approached her, concern evident in his weathered face. "You holding up all right, Mrs. Grayson? It's been a long day." "I'm fine, Marshal," Amelia assured him. "Just worried about Mr. Gardner." Thornton nodded, settling beside her as she sipped coffee from a tin cup. "Gardner's a resourceful man. If anyone can survive out here, it's him." "You know him well?" Amelia asked, eager for any insight into Victoria that might help their search. "Known him since he first came to the territory. Just a boy then, really, with his younger brother in tow." Thornton's expression grew reminiscent. "Worked harder than men twice his age, saved every penny, then struck silver up in the hills. Could have taken that money and lived easy in some city, but he stayed, built something lasting." He glanced at Amelia. "That's rare, especially in someone so young." "Yes," Amelia agreed softly. "He feels a great responsibility for the people who depend on him." "That he does." Thornton studied her over his coffee cup. "The Jenkins woman mentioned you two have become close." Amelia felt color rise in her cheeks but met his gaze directly. "We have. Victoria, Mr. Gardner, has been very kind to me since my arrival. The marshal smiled slightly. Kind, is it? Well, that's one word for it. Caleb Jenkins says the boss rides over to your cabin most evenings, bringing books and such. Our relationship is entirely proper, Marshal, Amelia said with dignity, though she couldn't help but smile at his fatherly concern. Never doubted it, ma'am. Gardner's a gentleman through and through. Thornton set down his empty cup. Just glad to see him finally taking an interest. Boy's been alone too long, building that empire of his with nobody to share it. The conversation shifted to plans for the next day's search, but Thornton's words stayed with Amelia as she tried to sleep that night, wrapped in blankets beneath the vast Montana sky. Victoria had indeed been alone too long, as perhaps had she. Two solitary people, wounded by life's harsh lessons, cautiously discovering the possibility of connection. They had to find him. The alternative was unthinkable. The second day of searching proved as fruitless as the first. They covered miles of territory, finding no sign of Victoria or his distinctive black stallion. By the time they made camp that evening, even the most optimistic members of the search party were growing concerned. If he was on the main trail, we'd have found some trace by now, one of the deputies observed as they gathered around the fire. Marshal Thornton nodded grimly. We'll push on to the Broken Spur tomorrow, check if Cooper's men have had any luck. After that, we'll need to expand the search to less likely areas. The implication was clear. If Victoria wasn't on any of the expected routes, either he had deliberately gone elsewhere or something had forced him off the trail. Neither possibility was reassuring. Amelia barely slept that night, her mind racing with scenarios, each more concerning than the last. By dawn, she was already up, preparing coffee for the search party, needing to keep busy to hold her fears at bay. They reached the Broken Spur by mid-afternoon on the third day. James Cooper, a barrel-chested man with a thick gray beard, greeted them with evident relief. Thornton, any sign of Gardner? The marshal shook his head. Nothing along the main trail or the river route. Your men have any luck? Cooper's expression darkened. No, and we've covered every inch between here and the county line. It's like he vanished into thin air. Anxiety coiled tighter in Amelia's stomach. If James Cooper's men had been as thorough as the marshal's party, and still no sign had been found. Cooper noticed her then, his bushy eyebrows rising in surprise. Who's this? Mrs. Amelia Grayson, Thornton introduced her. She's the schoolteacher at the Rocking G wanted to join the search. Cooper's weathered face showed confusion. Schoolteacher? Gardner didn't mention hiring a schoolteacher when he was here. I've been at the ranch for over 2 months, Amelia explained, puzzled by his reaction. Victoria, Mr. Gardner hired me in Missoula this July. Cooper and Thornton exchanged a look that Amelia couldn't interpret. Before she could question it, Cooper invited them all inside for a hot meal while they discussed next steps. The Broken Spur ranch house was smaller than Victoria's grand residence but comfortable and well-maintained. Cooper's wife, a pleasant-faced woman named Ellen, served them a hearty stew with fresh bread, treating Amelia with particular kindness. You must be worried sick, dear, she said softly as the men discussed search strategies at the other end of the table. James says Mr. Gardner spoke very fondly of you during his stay. This information warmed Amelia despite her concerns. Did he? What did he say? Ellen smiled, that he'd found someone special who was bringing new life to the ranch, that perhaps it was time to think beyond mere expansion and consider what truly makes a home. Tears prickled behind Amelia's eyes at this confirmation of Victoria's feelings. She blinked them away, determined to maintain composure. We will find him, she said with quiet conviction. We must. After the meal, Marshal Thornton outlined a new search plan. We need to consider that Gardner might have deliberately taken an unexpected route. Cooper, you mentioned he was interested in that property along Eagle Creek. Cooper nodded, said he was thinking of acquiring it if the price was right. Connects his north pasture with the timber he bought last year. Then that's one possibility. He decided to look over that land on his way home. Thornton spread a rough map on the table. It would have taken him west of the main trail, through some pretty rugged country. Amelia studied the map, noting the distance and terrain between the Broken Spur and the area Thornton indicated. How long would such a detour take? 2 days, maybe 3 if he was really examining the property, Cooper estimated. But Gardner's usually good about sending word if his plans change. The search parties were reorganized. Cooper's men would continue checking areas closer to the broken spur. Marshal Thornton would lead a group to the Eagle Creek property. The deputy would return to the Rocking G with any searchers who needed to get back to their regular duties and to check if Victoria had somehow returned by another route entirely. "Mrs. Grayson, you should return to the ranch with Deputy Larson," Thornton suggested, his tone kind but firm. "We're heading into rough country now and—" "With all due respect, Marshal," Amelia interrupted, "I wish to continue searching. I'm not overly tired, and my presence hasn't hindered your efforts thus far." Thornton assessed her determined expression and sighed. "Very well, but the same conditions apply. You stay with the main group, no wandering off." They departed the following morning, heading northwest toward Eagle Creek. The terrain immediately became more challenging: steeper hills, denser forests, frequent streams that required careful crossing. Amelia's riding skills were tested, but Victoria's patient teaching served her well. By midday, they had reached a high ridge overlooking a verdant valley with a creek winding through it. "That's Eagle Creek," Thornton informed her. "The property Gardner was interested in covers most of this valley, and the timber stand to the north." They descended carefully into the valley, spreading out to check for any sign of recent passage. Amelia stayed with Marshal Thornton, her eyes constantly scanning the landscape for anything unusual. It was late afternoon when one of the searchers called out from a wooded area near the creek. Everyone converged quickly, Amelia's heart pounding with both hope and fear. The man had found hoofprints, fresh ones, heading deeper into the trees along the creek bank. "Could be Gardner," Thornton said, examining the tracks. "Size is right for that big stallion of his, and these are recent, day-old at most." They followed the tracks, moving more quickly now that they had a trail. The hoofprints led to a small clearing beside the creek, where clear signs of a camp were visible: ashes from a fire, flattened grass where someone had slept. "He was here," one of the searchers confirmed, kneeling to examine the fire remains. "Not more than a day ago, judging by these ashes." Relief flooded through Amelia. Victoria was alive, or had been very recently. The tracks continued beyond the campsite, following the creek northward. "We'll keep following," Thornton decided, "but we've only got another hour of good light. If we don't find him by dusk, we'll make camp and continue at first light." They pressed on, the tracks occasionally disappearing on rocky ground, but always resuming where the soil softened again. The creek led them into increasingly dense forest, the trees crowding close on either side. The sun was setting, golden light filtering through the pine branches when they heard it, the distant whinny of a horse. Everyone froze, listening intently. The sound came again, closer this time. "That's him," Thornton said confidently. "I'd know that stallion's voice anywhere." They urged their mounts forward, following the sound rather than the tracks now. Around a bend in the creek, the trees opened into another small clearing. And there, standing beside his black stallion, was Victoria Gardner. Amelia's breath caught at the sight of him. He was dirty, unshaven, his clothing torn and stained, but undeniably alive and apparently uninjured. He was bent over something on the ground, his back to them, unaware of their approach. "Gardner," Thornton called out. Victoria spun around, his hand dropping instinctively to his sidearm before recognition dawned. "Marshal." "What in God's name?" His words cut off abruptly as he spotted Amelia among the search party. Shock registered on his face, followed by something that looked remarkably like alarm. Amelia slid from her saddle, heedless of propriety, and hurried toward him. "Victoria, we've been searching for days. Are you hurt? What happened?" Before she could reach him, however, Victoria moved quickly to intercept her, blocking her view of whatever lay on the ground behind him. "Amelia, you shouldn't be here," he said urgently. "You need to go back to the ranch." Hurt and confusion stopped her in her tracks. This was hardly the reunion she had imagined during days of anxious searching. "Victoria." "What's wrong?" Marshal Thornton had dismounted as well and was approaching with a frown. "Gardner, you've had half the territory searching for you. Cooper's men, my deputies, your own hands, all looking for 3 days straight." "What the hell happened?" Victoria's expression was strained, his eyes darting between the marshal and Amelia. "It's complicated. I found sign of those rustlers we've been tracking." decided to follow rather than head straight back to the ranch. Alone, without sending word, Thornton sounded skeptical. That's not like you, Gardner. As I said, it's complicated. Victoria's stance remained defensive, his body positioned to block whatever lay behind him from view. One of the search party members had circled around, approaching from the other side of the clearing. His startled exclamation drew everyone's attention. "Marshal, you'd better come see this." Thornton moved quickly around Victoria, who closed his eyes briefly in resignation. Amelia followed, her confusion mounting. What she saw made her stop short, disbelief flooding through her. A young woman lay on a makeshift pallet of blankets beside the creek. She was clearly ill or injured, her face flushed with fever, her dark hair spread across the improvised pillow. More shocking, however, was her condition. She was heavily pregnant, her swollen belly prominent beneath the blanket covering her. "Victoria," Amelia's voice barely rose above a whisper. "Who is this?" The look Victoria gave her contained equal parts regret and resolve. "This is Anna Lewis, my wife." The look Victoria gave her contained equal parts regret and resolve. "This is Anna Lewis." "My wife." The words hit Amelia like a physical blow, robbing her of breath. The forest seemed to spin around her, the towering pines, the rushing creek, the grim faces of the search party. Wife. The word echoed in her mind, shattering the fragile hope she had nurtured over the past weeks. "Your wife," Marshal Thornton's voice was sharp with disbelief. "Gardner, you've been in this territory 5 years. You never mentioned a wife." "She left before I struck silver," Victoria said, his voice flat. He turned back to the woman on the ground, who moaned softly, her hands clutching her swollen abdomen. "I thought she was gone for good." "I thought," he didn't finish the sentence. Amelia took a step back, feeling like an intruder in a tragedy she didn't understand. She wanted to run. She wanted to mount her horse and ride until the rocking G was nothing but a memory. But then the woman, Anna, cried out, a sound of pure agony. "She's in labor," Victoria said, panic edging into his tone. "She's been sick for days, the fever, and now this." Amelia looked at Victoria's desperate face. She looked at the suffering woman, and she remembered who she was. She wasn't just a heartbroken widow, she was a woman who had survived loss before. She pushed past her own pain. "Marshal, we need hot water and clean cloths. Someone build up the fire." She knelt beside Anna, her skirts soaking in the damp earth. "Victoria, move aside, let me see her." Victoria looked at her, stunned. "Amelia, you don't have to." "Move," she commanded, her voice steady despite the trembling of her hands. He moved. The next 6 hours were a nightmare of shadow and firelight. The search party retreated to the edge of the clearing, giving them privacy. Victoria stayed close, fetching water, holding Anna when the pains racked her body, his face a mask of grim endurance. Anna was delirious, her words a jumble of names and pleas. She called for Jack, the gambler she had run off with, Victoria explained in a hollow voice during a lull. She begged forgiveness, then cursed the cold, then cried for her mother. Amelia worked tirelessly, using every scrap of knowledge she possessed. But as the night deepened, it became clear that Anna's strength was failing. The fever was too high, her body too weakened by whatever hardships she had endured before Victoria found her. Just before dawn, the baby was born, a small, silent girl. Amelia worked frantically to clear the infant's airway, and finally a thin cry pierced the air. "She's alive," Amelia whispered, wrapping the baby in a clean shirt Victoria had provided from his saddlebag. She turned to Anna. The young woman's eyes were open, lucid for the first time. She looked at Victoria, then at the bundle in Amelia's arms. "Vic," she rasped. Victoria leaned closer, taking her hand. "I'm here, Anna." Not yours," she whispered, the confession costing her the last of her breath. "Jack's, but don't let him take her, promise." "I promise," Victoria said, his voice thick with tears. "She's safe. I swear it." Anna looked at Amelia. "Thanks you." Her eyes drifted shut. A moment later, her chest stilled. Silence descended on the clearing, heavier than the darkness. Victoria bowed his head over his wife's hand. Amelia sat back on her heels, clutching the newborn infant to her chest, tears finally spilling over to track through the dust on her face. They buried Anna Lewis in a small cemetery plot on the Rocking G, next to Victoria's brother, Thomas. It was a simple service, attended by the ranch hands and the search party. Amelia stood at the back, holding the baby, whom Mrs. Jenkins had helped her bathe and feed with goat's milk. The infant was sleeping now, unaware of the tragedy of her birth. After the final prayer, the men dispersed, leaving Victoria alone by the grave. Amelia hesitated, then walked toward him. "She's sleeping," she said softly. Victoria turned. He looked exhausted, aged 10 years and 3 days. "Thank you, Amelia, for everything. You saved this child." "She needs a name," Amelia said. "Hope," Victoria said, looking at the grave. "That's what Anna wanted. A new start." He looked at Amelia, then really looked at her. "Amelia, about what happened, what I said." "You don't have to explain," she interrupted, her heart aching. "She was your wife. You did your duty." "She was a mistake," he said harshly. "A mistake I made when I was 18 and lonely. She hated the life here. She left me without a word. I searched for a year before I gave up." He ran a hand over his face. "I didn't love her, Amelia, not for a long time, but I couldn't leave her to die in the woods." "I know," she said. "That's the man you are, honorable, decent." She took a breath. "I'll stay until you find a wet nurse for Hope. And perhaps until the end of the school term. But then, I think it best if I return to Missoula." Victoria stiffened. "Why?" "Because," she looked away, unable to meet his eyes. "Because I came here looking for a place where I fit. And I thought, for a while I thought I had found it. But this," she gestured to the baby, the grave, the complexity of his past. "This is not my place, Victoria. You have a daughter to raise now. You don't need a schoolteacher complicating your life." "You think you're a complication?" Victoria stepped closer, his voice rising. "Amelia, look at me." She forced herself to meet his gaze. "I told you once that I built this ranch for a future I couldn't see," he said, intense. "I told you it was empty. When I found Anna, I felt nothing but duty, pity, but when I saw you ride into that clearing. When I saw you fight for her and for this child." He reached out, his hand cupping her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear. "I didn't feel duty," he whispered. "I felt fear that you would leave. Fear that you would think I had lied to you." "You didn't lie," she whispered. "I didn't tell you the whole truth because I thought it was buried," he admitted. "But the past has a way of surfacing, now it's here. I have a daughter, not of my blood, maybe, but of my name. I have a ranch that needs a mother as much as a father." He took the baby from her arms, holding Hope gently, but kept his other hand on Amelia's arm, anchoring her to him. "I don't need a schoolteacher, Amelia. I need a partner. I need someone who knows what it is to be lost and what it is to be found." He looked down at the baby, then back at her. "I asked you once to follow me home because you had nowhere else to go. Now I'm asking you to stay, because I don't want to be home without you." Amelia looked at the man standing before her, scarred by life, burdened by responsibility, but standing tall beneath the weight. She looked at the baby in his arms, a life saved from the storm, and she looked at the land around them, vast and enduring. She realized that Margaret Jenkins had been right. The frontier took, yes. It took innocence and ease and sometimes life itself, but it gave back too. It gave strength, it gave purpose, and if you were brave enough to claim it, it gave love. "I'm not lost anymore, Victoria," she said softly. "No," he agreed, a smile breaking through the exhaustion on his face. "Neither am I." Epilogue. 3 years later, 1881. The schoolroom was quiet, the children having been dismissed for the day. Amelia wiped the blackboard clean, humming a tune under her breath. The door opened, and a sturdy 3-year-old girl with dark curls ran in. "Mama, Papa says the new foals are here." Amelia turned, smiling as she scooped Hope up. "Did he now, and did he say you could run in the schoolhouse?" "He said it was important news," Victoria said, leaning against the doorframe. He looked older, the gray at his temples more pronounced, but the shadows in his eyes were gone, replaced by a deep, abiding contentment. He walked over and kissed his wife, then tickled Hope until she shrieked with laughter. "They're beautiful, Amelia," he said. "Best stock we've ever had." "Like everything on the rocking G," she teased. He put his arm around her waist, his hand resting on the swell of her stomach where their second child, a son, if Margaret's predictions were to be believed, was growing. "Not everything," he murmured, looking at her with that intensity that still made her breath catch. "The best things on this ranch didn't come from stock. They came from a stagecoach in Missoula." Amelia leaned her head on his shoulder, looking out the window at the Golden Valley. She thought of the widow in black who had arrived with nothing but a trunk and a broken heart. She thought of the boy who had built an empire to hide his loneliness. They had both been lost. But looking at her husband and daughter, Amelia knew the truth. They had simply been taking the long way home.